Hey, you guys, Erin here. I am back with another moon update for you, although we're going to be talking about a whole heck of a lot more than just a moon update in this recording. What we're going to be focusing on today is it's a new moon slash solar eclipse we've got coming up here on Sunday, September 21st. And this is coming through the sign of Virgo, the 29th degree, the crisis degree of the zodiac. Okay. Really, really strong stuff that's coming through here. So I'm going to break that down. First, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the sign of Virgo in and of itself, because there's still any new moon. It's a time to be manifesting those new beginnings and growth that are related to that zodiac sign. Although, if you remember, this will be the second new moon in the sign of Virgo. We had another one about 4 weeks ago. That's pretty rare. That doesn't happen very often. It's a very, very different lineup. But it's still a time to be manifesting growth that we want to experience. It's related to this sign of Virgo, like throwing those messages out into the universe. How do I want to grow in these ways that are related to the sign of Virgo? So I'll break down the sign of Virgo, but then I'm going to pull up the chart. And we're going to go through these extremely powerful forces that are coming through. As I mentioned, this new moon takes place at the 29th degree of Virgo, but we've also got Mars at the 29th degree of Libra. That 29th degree, it's called the anaretic degree, sometimes described as the danger zone. Sometimes it's described as like the crisis point of any zodiac sign. Okay, so we're going to break all that down, and I'm going to apply it to kind of like what's going on in the world right now. And I'll just be talking about the overall astrological forces we're receiving in the days surrounding this transit, because it's really, really important information here that I'm finding anyway. And then I also want to talk about certain parts of the body that are ruled by the sign of Virgo, because these parts of our body become sensitized or activated anytime anything up in the sky transits through the sign of Virgo, whether you feel it or not. Some people, certainly, depending on how it's hitting your own natal chart, some people will be like, holy smokes, I really felt that, in this part of my body. Some people won't notice it at all. Whether you're aware of it or not, these parts of our body are still, it's like we're receiving the energy from the sun, the moon, also the south nodes in Virgo, and Venus is in Virgo. All these celestial forces hitting these parts of our body. So I will be mentioning some potential herbal remedies to help support these parts of our body the days surrounding this transit. And as usual, I'll also mention some gemstones that resonate well with the sign of Virgo. Now, before I really get into the sign of Virgo, I just want to kind of briefly point this out, that eclipses are extreme forces. Okay. Rudolf Steiner described eclipses as a safety valve, like a pressure safety valve, because they're what eclipses are from. It's an alignment with the north and south node, which kind of work as valves. It's like the pump and the drain point. The lunar north node is like a pump, and the lunar south node is like this drain point. They work like valves, okay? And they can almost be described as, when we have an eclipse, it's almost like a release of pressure, but they're very, I don't want to make this sound scary, but eclipses can be kind of dangerous. In fact, you know what? I'm just going to do it. I'm going to read, I'll leave a link in the description below where you guys can read more about this stuff if you find it interesting, but I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent here. But okay, this is from Rudolf Steiner. A lunar eclipse exists for the purpose of allowing the evil thoughts which are present in the cosmos to approach those human beings who are desirous of possessing them. Okay. And that really does make sense to me. As I've said so many times before, I personally do not recommend going out there and just exposing ourselves to an eclipse. And to be clear, this eclipse is not visible anywhere in it. A, it's a partial solar eclipse. B, it will not be visible throughout anywhere in the United States. I think it's visible in like New Zealand and maybe certain parts of Australia. But that doesn't mean we're not exposed to this energy. That quote that I was specifically giving you was about a lunar eclipse. There's a little bit of a uniqueness there's actually a lot of a uniqueness between the lunar eclipse and the solar eclipse, but I'm not going to go too crazy on that. Again, I'll leave a link if you guys want to read more about that in the description below. I'll make it say something like Rudolf Steiner's eclipse perspective or something like that. But it's the reason I brought up that lunar eclipse, and people, the desires, of possession of the evil forces, that sort of thing, is because we just had that lunar eclipse. on September 7th, which was a total lunar eclipse. Okay. And not only that, but Saturn was involved, this incredible, I mean, all of these power players, Uranus and Pluto and Saturn, and all these guys they're in retrograde and they're just so forceful and potent and strong. And I'm thinking about, you know, I would assume that most of you have at least heard about this, but I don't know what kind of words I can use here on YouTube, so I'm just going to say the passing of Charlie Kirk. Okay, whether you love or hate the guy, it's absolutely brutal. It's disgusting. I very unintentionally and very unfortunately saw the clip. I did not mean to. It was like, I don't know, 10 minutes after the event occurred. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, I encourage you not to go looking into it unless you are really prepared for some serious rabbit holes. And not only that, but there's a lot of brutality behind it because this man was shot. At least that's what is being shown. Okay. And it was really, really awful. Like I said, I just so happened to open up my phone and it was like 10 minutes after it happened. So it was just flooding through the internet. And it was, I mean, I honestly lost sleep over what I saw. It's like you can't unsee these things. Some people are more sensitive to it than others, and I'm definitely sensitive to it. But then after this event occurred, the internet has exploded with division. Okay. Personally, I'm not going to go too crazy deep into this, but I personally do not, I think there's the man behind the curtain, hypothetically speaking here. It's not just one man. There's evil forces that are a certain group of people. This is my opinion and I'm entitled to it. Certain group of people, and I'm not going to say any names. I don't want to get shot, that are kind of running the show. And what it's created is even more, because if you don't know who Charlie Kirk was, he was very, very right-wing conservative. He was an incredible debater. I didn't follow his work necessarily at all, but I had seen some work from him. And one thing that I always thought was, I always admire people who can like rapid fire statistics, like especially in a debate, and they're just so speak on point and eloquently and tend to be like diplomatic about things. And I always admire people who can converse like that. And Charlie Kirk was definitely one of them. Certainly didn't agree with necessarily all of his points. I will say this, that it appears that in the last few weeks of this man's life, he was having some sort of a spiritual transformation. His views were changing on certain things. Some people are going to know what I'm talking about. Most people won't. Regardless, I don't necessarily encourage you to go looking into this unless you really feel like you're prepared for it. But overall, ultimately, what's happened here is because he was super, right wing, and very much a Trump supporter, that sort of thing. The left wing side there's this extreme division going on. Of course, that division has already been there, but now it's getting very ugly. It's getting really, really to the point where, honestly, if I'm just going to be completely open and honest here, I do think that this is potential for opening us up into some kind of a civil war, which I find extremely unfortunate because I don't think that this at all should be considered something between left and right wing. There's so much more behind that. If you don't know what I'm talking about, hopefully at least, especially with Uranus transiting through Gemini and Pluto transiting through Aquarius and them trining each other for quite some time, I think more and more and more people are going to somehow be exposed to this information. And it's a dark, scary rabbit hole. But I think it's important that we all start to see this. Where I'm going with this is that I do think that there's a lot of evil forces coming through. As I've been saying for a long time, I think more than anything, it's a very sinister spiritual warfare that's going on. And I think what's so significant about this eclipse season, especially since this solar eclipse is at the 29th degree, and not only that, but just a couple days after this eclipse and the sun moves into the sign of Libra, we've got the equinox going on. There's so much like really intense force is being brought to Earth. Why I'm putting so much emphasis on this is because I want to remind people, anybody who's willing to listen, I want to remind people that we are all human. Yeah, there's some humans doing some really awful, disgusting, nasty things. I've even seen people just, reels or posts of, people celebrating this man's death. And that is repulsive to me. That is, I can't, I could name 3 humans on Earth. I'm not going to name them here because I certainly don't want to get shot at, but that are, in my very strong opinion, straight up evil people. One individual, some of you might know who I'm talking about, who wants to block out the sun. Okay, that is repulsive to me. The sun, it's our vital force. But even those people that come to mind, somebody who's trying to push things onto people. I have to be so careful about what I say here. Those people are really bad, but I still would not celebrate them being assassinated in public in front of their family. Okay, that I just don't understand. And so with that said, this is creating massive amounts of fury. That is this division. And I want to remind people that for the most part, humans want to be good people. Yeah, there's some really bad people out there, really bad, that are, in my opinion, possessed. But for the most part, even if you have a completely different political perspective or religious perspective or whatever it is, your belief systems, we're all still humans, and people who have those, say you've got a family member who's super, liberal, and you're a super Republican or whatever. It's like there's so much to argue about there. There's so much to argue. But in the end of the day, if you didn't know each other and you saw, that person, say, drowning or they're in some sort of a, really bad situation, I feel like most humans would want to go save that person, no matter what their belief system is. So that with the energy that we are receiving, very specifically through this eclipse season, but it's going to carry on. I mean, most intensely, it's going to carry on for the next few weeks, passing the solar eclipse, but then it still carries on for about 6 months. And really, there's like these little sub cycles with the way eclipses work. Okay. It's literally going to linger on through this next Saros cycle, the next 18 and a half years, but it's ultimately most prominent. The energy of an eclipse is most prominent for the next couple weeks after the eclipse, and then also the next 6 months after an eclipse, just a little bit less intensity. Now we're getting blending in with other cycles of things, but it's also very intense for a whole nother year. And I do feel that this particular set of eclipses is like, especially since we got Saturn involved here, it's like this creating a new structure for humanity. And I feel like it's so important that we do our best to try and see past. It's like, the expression, what is it? United we stand, divided we fall, something along those lines. It's the division is what's going to create a serious collapse. And to a certain degree, we need some sort of a collapse to go on here in order to be rebuilding something that's more beautiful and something that's more powerful. But the divisiveness and the anger that's being shared amongst humanity right now is not good for anybody. And with that said, with this eclipse, I would be keeping that in mind. I know I'm going to be keeping that in mind, but also recognizing that it's almost like, here's your option. Here through this eclipse season, here's the option to either be filled with anger and hate or to choose love. That sounds so corny, but that's ultimately what it's really all about. Okay, so there's that. I hope that made sense to you guys. Let's get into the sign of Virgo. And I'm just going to kind of briefly do this because I literally just 4 weeks ago put out a new moon in Virgo video. So just kind of briefly here, The sign of Virgo, this is what we call the mutable earth sign. Mutable meaning it's adaptable, okay? And in the element of earth, it has a lot to do with our earthly responsibilities and our day-to-day routines. In fact, this eclipse could be, on an individual, through the individual forces, how we receive this. Of course, it's very unique to each and every one of us, depending on how it's hitting your own natal chart. But it's like providing an energy to shift into, let's say there's something that you don't like about your day-to-day routine, or a habit, or something, whatever it is, something that you're not happy with, that's kind of the day-to-day routine. This mutable force that's coming through, especially since the South Node solar eclipse in the sign of Virgo, leaves us with this really prominent energy to be able to shift what it is we don't like about that day-to-day routine. Okay, now Virgo is ruled by Mercury. Mercury has so much to do in the sign of Virgo, very specifically. Mercury has this very big influence on basically the organization that's going on with our thoughts and feelings that go in, like the data processing as you're receiving information. It's, being brought into your nervous system, into your spinal cord, into your consciousness. And it's the people who have a really strong, say they were born with Mercury in Virgo or something like that, they have a better tendency of keeping that information organized in their consciousness. Okay. And people who have a really screwy Mercury in their natal chart, sometimes it could be really hard for them to concentrate or process the information in an organized manner. Okay. So that's this sign of Virgo. I'll just say this right now. It rules the sympathetic nervous system, which is like kind of fight or flight. It's a nervous kind of energy. A lot of that has to do with the fact that it's ruled by Mercury. A lot of people definitely feel like are on edge. Holy smokes, that is definitely the case that I'm seeing here. But on a more personal note for people out there, it's like just recognizing if that's something you want to shift. If you're somebody who deals with anxiousness and nervousness, and you want to shift that, you want to let go of some of that, you could definitely, this is a great time to set the intentions for that, especially because it's a South Node solar eclipse. The South Node is what drains things away. Sign of Virgo is represented by the Virgin. The Virgin, this is all about purity. This is all about keeping things clean, your body clean. And I'll just say this also, the sign of Virgo rules the liver and the intestines, extremely important parts of our body to keep things functioning optimally, if somebody's got a clean liver and clean intestines, they're going to be able to function a whole heck of a lot better than if they got a backed up intestines and clogged up liver, that sort of thing. Toxicity going on. And that sign of Virgo, that it's the purity, keeping things pure and clean. There's so much, I guess I could call it theology behind the liver, because it stores so much information there. Okay. Now also the sign of Virgo, it could have something to do with like keeping things pure and clean in your home, your house, your junk drawer. I just actually, while the moon, while the sun and the South Node are going through the sign of Virgo, with the last new moon in Virgo, I set the intentions to clean my car. So it's interesting. I always keep my house super, super clean. I'm just kind of weird about that. I can't function well if there's messes in my house. But my car, because I don't drive very much, I work from home. So my car will have a tendency to get really dirty, especially because I live in the mountains, surrounded by trees. And so it's like all the pine and the leaves and the pine needles all get kind of like jammed in the crevices of my car and that sort of thing. And I finally just scrubbed out every little corner of my car with setting the intentions with that last new moon in Virgo. And boy, do I feel good about it. It feels so much better to get in my car when everything's clean and that sort of thing. So that's, just something as an example to work with setting the intentions for this new moon in Virgo. Now, also the sign of Virgo, the motto is I analyze. It's a super analytical energy that has a big influence. I mean, it's a connection to it ruling the sympathetic nervous system. Like I mentioned, it is kind of like this nervous energy, but it pays very close attention to the details of things. Okay. It's like when we think about sign of like here's Virgo, here's Pisces, they're opposite each other. You'll see this better when I pull up the chart. Sign of Pisces is kind of like, ooh, like kind of like looking at the whole big picture. It's a sign of oneness. It's a sign of mysticism, where Virgo's like, whoop, paying attention to the details of every little thing, which I personally really, truly admire that Virgoan quality in people. When somebody's got like the qualities of Virgo energy, it was because I don't have any planets in the sign of Virgo, and I kind of wish I did, because I feel like I'd be better at paying attention to the details of things. But it's overall this very fascinating energy where they tend to, a true like Virgo, not necessarily just sun in Virgo. They can be a Virgo rising, they can have their moon in Virgo. It just depends on what it is. Maybe it's their Mercury in Virgo, will be very, very detail oriented and have this very strong tendency to keep not only information organized in their own awareness and in their own consciousness, but also, and another thing about this sign of Virgo, I mean, I feel like everybody's going to function more optimally when things are clean and organized in their environment, but especially the Virgoan energy. So how do you want to grow in these ways? What kind of intentions do you want to set for this last moon in Virgo and all the way until next year, until next Virgo season? Approximately 6 months from now, we'll actually have the full moon in the sign of Virgo. That would be the peak of this particular growth cycle. It's important to understand we're always experiencing all different types of cycles, some that are just based on our own natal chart, some that are based on what the moon is doing, some that are based on what the sun is doing, some that are based on our progressions. It's all sorts of cycles we're going through. But this particular, this is the beginning of this 29-degree Virgo new moon. And then 6 months from now, we have the full moon in the sign of Pisces. That'll be the peak of the growth cycle. That's the basics of it. So how do you want to grow in these ways? Now let's pull up the chart. Start going through these very, very strong astrological forces. In case you're new here, I work with geocentric Western astrology. So with that said, what we're looking at here, it's like a snapshot of the tropical zodiac at the time of this new moon, using geocentric with the Earth right here in the middle of this thing. These right here are all the symbols for the planets in the celestial bodies. Like there's Venus, there's the sun, there's the moon, there's Mercury. We go in the wheel a little ways. These are the symbols for the zodiac signs. That all those planets and celestial bodies will be beginning to return to Earth at the time of this new moon solar eclipse. This is taking place, I don't remember if I already said this, Sunday, September 21st, 2025 at 12:54 p.m. Pacific time. You might want to, if you're somebody who really, if you like me and you like to pull out your journal and write all this stuff down, I always like to set my intentions in the hours leading up to the new moon. And so we might want, if that's the case, if you are paying attention to the details, then you might want to, look to see what time this is actually coming through in your own location, your own time zone. And on that note, the maximum of the eclipse, again, this is not visible in the United States, but doesn't mean we still experience it. This energy still comes through, whether we see it or not. But the maximum strength of the solar eclipse it's at 12:41 p.m. Pacific time. It's actually very close to 12:42. It's like 12:41 and 59 minutes Pacific time, that the maximum of that eclipse. And personally, I will be indoors. If I'm going to get really detailed here, I'm actually going to be driving, but I'll be in my car. I just would not be outside having. This is me. Everybody's entitled to do whatever the heck they want to do for an eclipse, but I will not be out there having some sort of a ritual or a ceremony at the time of an eclipse, ever. Okay, now let's start here. Here's the sun, here's the moon. Every single time we have a new moon, the sun and the moon are together. They're in the exact same spot. They're at 29 degrees. Here's that little symbol for the sign of Virgo, and 5 arc minutes. Okay, so that's the new moon. What's making this an eclipse is this right here, is the south node. Okay, when we have a new moon and the sun and the moon are right next to either the north or the south lunar node, that is what creates an eclipse. So this is a south node solar eclipse in the sign of Virgo. Okay, that south node is like the drain point of the valve. Opposite that is the north node, which that's where energy comes in. These guys really do work like that. The south node, this is the dragon's tail, or Ketu, okay? The north node is the dragon's head, or Rahu, okay? And as I mentioned before in several videos, they rule over the journey of our soul from lifetime to lifetime to lifetime. And somebody asked me about it, I believe it was Sarah, in the comments, asked to know more about the Saros cycles. Maybe I'll leave a link so you guys can learn more about Saros cycles. But it's basically the nodes take about 18 and a half years to go around the whole zodiac. They go backwards through the zodiac. And those are those cycles. And there's like sub-cycles within sub-cycles within sub-cycles of eclipse energy. But ultimately, it's like that is what is suggested. That's what we incarnate through into this lifetime through these lunar nodes. Okay, so there's that. Now, I'm trying to decide. Let's just get into this. Let's start down here with Saturn. Okay, so there's a very strong opposition going to Saturn over here. Saturn is what influences structure, stability. Saturn is kind of a cruel energy. Saturn is just very cold and rigid and astringent and influences things like hard lessons to learn. Okay, and going through the sign of Pisces in retrograde. There's so many retrogrades going on. When a celestial body, when a planet is in retrograde, you can think of like as in you're driving backwards or you're walking backwards. You're just not operating as gracefully as you are when you're driving or walking forwards. At least not most people anyway. Maybe there's some people out there who drive better backwards than they do forwards or walk better backwards than they do forwards. But for the most part, most of us are not. It's like you're going to be kind of wobbly driving backwards, right? And that's when we think about the energy of a planet. So Saturn, if you just picture Saturn's archetypes are old, he's Kronos, old, rigid man. He's the bringer of death. Okay. And not doesn't mean this that somebody has to die when we have a Saturn transit, but it's the death of something. And so here he is going backwards. Okay. So this influencer of harsh, cold, astringent, blockages, restrictions is now operating, going backwards. And in the sign of Pisces, the motto is, I believe. I feel like potentially Saturn is in retrograde. Oh boy, I can't remember. I think Saturn's in retrograde for at least a couple months. And then he's going to move back into the sign of Aries in February 13th. He'll be back in the sign of Aries. So between now and February of 2026, Saturn is going this last little take in the sign of Pisces all the way for the next approximately 28 years. Saturn won't be back in the sign of Pisces for approximately 28 years. And so he's finishing up in there. Okay. It's almost like potentially the end of beliefs, not the collective's beliefs systems, but within ourselves. Say, for example, you are absolutely convinced in some particular kind of religion or even just something, doesn't have to be a religion, something. You're like, I believe this is the case. I believe what I saw on the news. I don't ever. But it's like, whatever it is, like I believe, and there very well could be something that's like, oh, like, nope, we're bringing that to an end. There's something else that's coming into the picture here. Okay. And I've said this so many times that this, this potential for, especially in the United States, to go into some kind of a civil war. I believe it's very psychological and spiritually based. And Saturn finishing up in the sign of Pisces, that's a very on point alignment with what could trigger that. I don't think necessarily we're going to go into a civil war over the next couple months, but it could be based on people's belief systems. Not just belief systems, but more like some people would be like, no, I know this, even though we don't really know. Okay. I'm always open to listen to somebody's perspective, whether it's political, religious, whatever it is, even though I can't stand politics because to me, it's a dang puppet show. But I'm always willing to listen to people. And if they can convince me to like see things from a different perspective, I'm always open to that. This kind of transit is actually very much it opens up opportunities for that. Okay. And also potentially, oh God, it could totally go either way, depending on your own, what you decide to do with yourself, and also how this stuff is hitting your own natal chart. But it very well could be something where it's like, I'm ready to shift or change my mind on that perspective, but it's also could be like the the death of what you believed before, but it could also kind of create even more friction between humanity. That is the best way I think I can describe it, because this is such a strong opposition here that it's almost like they have to be integrated. They have to be, they have to work together here. Otherwise they battle each other. The sun and the moon they either are going to battle Saturn through this transit, or if we can kind of bring them together and have them complement each other. So it's like, again, setting the intentions for some sort of a shift in, your day-to-day routines or something like that. So a shift in, trying to keep something clean in your house or clean in your body, that sort of thing. And if you can integrate that Saturn in Pisces as, this is now becoming a part of my belief system. I want to integrate Saturn and Pisces with this new moon solar eclipse in the sign of Virgo, then they complement each other. But if they're battling each other, then that's such a great result. Gosh, I hope this is making sense. This is actually quite difficult to find the words to interpret properly for people to really understand what I'm saying here. Please feel free to leave, questions or comments in the comment section below, because I feel like this is going to be hard for some people to process. There's also a pretty strong opposition going to Neptune here. In fact, some might argue that's an even stronger one since it's an approaching one. Neptune is Pisces ruler. Okay, Neptune is what rules over things, what influences things of belief systems and mysticism and magic and psychic powers. Okay, and coming through 0 degrees Aries. Aries is the warrior. Aries is the pioneer. He's aggressive. The combination, Saturn and Neptune are going to be very, very close together, kind of all the way going through February, and even a little bit of March of 2026. They're very close together for quite some time. So if you picture Saturn's archetype, this old, strict, rigid old man who's like, oh, you get your work done, but right next to Neptune saying, okay, dreams, mysticism, visions. It's actually I think Saturn and Neptune conjunct, especially if you've got something either in the very late degrees of Pisces or the very early degrees of Aries, depending on what that thing is. Let's say your sun or your moon or your rising, something that prominent, then it's an incredible energy for like having the discipline to create something, because it's like bringing the visions together with the structure to create those things. But this is also opposing this new moon. All of these things need to come in together. They all need to be integrated together. And in fact, I'm going to say this as well. If you have anything between 28 degrees of Pisces or Virgo, this is an exceptionally, and what I mean by anything is especially if it's something prominent, your sun, your moon, your rising, or potentially your Mercury, or like the personal planets. If you've got something between 28 and going up to 29 degrees and 29 minutes, or even going up to the first few degrees of Aries, in either Pisces or Virgo, or the early degrees of Aries, or even the early degrees of Libra. It's probably really confusing as well. This is so much energy coming in on you, and it's practically begging for a complete shift. And I do think it's really, really important that we all keep ourselves super, super protected, but especially if this is hitting something prominent in your own natal chart. It's also very, very helpful to see which house in your natal chart this is activating. If you're using Placidus, you're going to want to see where 29 degrees Virgo is coming through. Which house in your natal chart does the sign of Virgo come through? If you're using whole sign, you just need to see where the sign of Virgo that what house the sign of Virgo comes through. And also because, see, what's going to happen here is about 5, 6 hours after this new moon, the moon will boop, move into the sign of Libra. And approximately 2 days after, like a day and a half after this new moon, the sun boop, moves into the sign of Libra. That's what I'm talking about. That sign of Libra over here. It's a good idea to see if you're using a whole sign house system. I would look to see really like, because this is so cuspy. What I mean by cuspy is the cusp between two signs. It's so close to the sign of Libra. You might want to also include the house that the sign of Libra comes through in your own natal chart, because that's also going to be highly, highly activated. Okay, now I feel like this is probably one of the more difficult ones to find the words to properly explain this kind of energy because it's just so powerful. In fact, what I'm going to get into next is like, holy smokes. Okay, let's look at this grand trine. Okay, here's this grand trine, that what the triangle going through the middle of the chart. And it's okay. As the moon moves forward, about 5 hours after this new moon solar eclipse, the moon will make an exact trine over to Uranus. And then just shortly after that, the moon will make an exact trine over to Pluto. About a day and a half, more like 2 days after this new moon solar eclipse, the sun will make an exact trine over to Uranus and an exact trine over to Pluto. So with that said, I mean, we've already talked about what Uranus and Gemini means in previous videos, but just as a little bit of a recap here, this is so interesting. So Uranus is abrupt. Uranus is spasmodic. Uranus influences things that are very unpredictable nature. Technological advancements, really. And the sign of Gemini, it's the sign of communication. Okay, this is, and to be very clear here, Uranus is going to the sign of Gemini, but in the next couple of months, Uranus is going to actually retrograde back into the sign of Taurus, and then it won't be till April of 2026 that Uranus really picks up his momentum and his journey through the sign of Gemini. Right now, he's peeking his head in there, peeking his head into the sign of communication. The sign of Gemini and the sign of Aquarius, but let's start with Gemini, has a very big influence on things like social media platforms, okay? Anything, whether it be Instagram or TikTok or YouTube or Telegram or, there's so many now. X, formerly known as Twitter. There's Discord. There's so many. Twitch, like all these things. And that's the very Gemini energy where people are communicating together. Well, we've got this bringer of abruptness going through this sign that rules over things like that. We're talking, as I've said so many times before, especially with Uranus trining Pluto for like kind of the whole next year, that there's massive changes that are going to be brought to these platforms. But as of right now, it's very, if you dare to go into comment sections below videos on YouTube or Instagram or whatever you're on, if you look at comments, people are literally attacking each other. And it very well could, and Uranus is in retrograde as well. So he's also this bringer of like spazzy, like unexpected weird changes, is also working in a wonky way because he's going backwards. And at 1 degree, that's super, super powerful. But it's almost like this introduction. I kind of wonder if, say, a few years from now, there's some sort of, they try to put like a stop on comment sections or something of that nature. Some of you might remember when on YouTube, you used to be able to give a video a thumbs down, but they took that away. That was like a change to a platform. I kind of wonder, and in fact, as of right now, there's comments that, just won't show up. They'll be deleted. They'll be, there's all different weird little things that people can report a comment being, bad or whatever it is. That's very Uranus in like activating that area. And I'm in certain ways a little bit concerned about the lack of free speech becoming even more. It's like that right being pulled away from people even more so. I think in the end, humanity will fight back because I think that's extremely important to have free speech. That's how we learn. That's how we, if you're blocked from reading certain things, how can we ever get to the bottom of things? How can we ever understand the truth if we don't have the opportunity to have an open discussion? Unfortunately, people are ripping each other apart through these discussions, at least from what I've seen on several platforms, reading through comment sections. But I do feel like that's playing a big role here. And then we got Pluto over here, also in retrograde, going through the sign of Aquarius. Pluto is the ruler of the underworld. Pluto is aggressive. Pluto's gnarly. Pluto's heavy. Pluto brings us down into the underworld and shows us the dark, scary stuff. But then so that we can kind of transform through that process, so that we can flush out the brutality that does not serve us and open up room for more powerful new beginnings. That's a very Pluto influence. Okay. Going through the sign of Aquarius, as mentioned, the sign of Gemini has a very big influence on social media because it's communication. But the sign of Aquarius is more like the advancements of anything technological. Okay. And I mentioned earlier that Uranus has an influence on technological advancements. That's because Uranus, it rules the sign of Aquarius. Uranus is what makes that sign of Aquarius very strongly associated with things like, all the advancements that we're seeing. Some definitely not so great. Some things are actually getting a little sketchy. All the AI stuff. I've talked about this stuff so much. I don't want to go too deep into it, but hopefully you guys are following along here. This trine that's going between them, again, that's going to last. Basically, sometimes it's going to be stronger than others, but it's kind of going on for about a year. And so it's like the influencer of these abrupt changes, the influencer of brutal, deep, dark changes, having a conversation together through that trine and being through signs that rule over people talking to each other through devices, through computers, through text messages, through emails. So it's just really, really interesting. And they're both trining. So they're both this, again, the moon, just like 5 or 6 hours, will make an exact trine to Pluto and Uranus. And then the sun, about 2 days after this new moon solar eclipse, the sun makes an exact trine with these guys. Overall, not only that, but Uranus and the sign of Aquarius have a very big influence on humanity in and of itself. This is opening up again, and what I am hoping for, I'm praying for, is that, people can find it in their hearts to make that shift into a more graceful way of sharing information amongst each other. I don't, that's probably a little bit of a delusion there. I don't necessarily foresee that happening, but that's what I'm hoping for. But what I'm actually seeing here is that it kind of getting flipped and going the other way, and things getting even more argumentative. But argumentative is very much an understatement. And that's why I'm encouraging people to be more open to listen to one another and not just attack somebody for what they think is true or real. Okay, let's see. Where should I go next? Let's talk about Venus here. Let's lighten things up a little bit here. Venus, the influencer of love and beauty and harmony. She just moved into the sign of Virgo. She's going to be in the sign of Virgo until I think it's October 19th. So about approximately a month, a little over a month, Venus will be going through the sign of Virgo. Now, I will say this, Venus, she's debilitated here because Venus is romance. Okay. And the sign of Virgo, you wouldn't necessarily find the word romance to describe the sign of Virgo. Doesn't mean anybody who's a Virgo can't be romantic, but it's the sign of being analytical and being of service and all kinds of things like that. But Venus is love and beauty and harmony and snuggles and romance. Okay. And not only that, but Venus exalts over here in the sign of Pisces. So she's in the opposite sign currently than the sign that she exalts in. And so she does struggle here. But overall, I kind of want to look at this optimistically and say, because Venus tames energy. Venus, she brings harmony. Venus does not like confrontation. Venus likes things calm and cool and collective and lovely. Okay, so she's in the same sign. This solar eclipse is coming through, so maybe she's able to tone some of this very strong, forceful energy coming through here. If you have anything near 2 degrees Virgo, it'll be very, very interesting. If you've got anything near 2 degrees Virgo, Venus could be bringing some more harmony into your life, some more beauty into your life, some more love into your life, maybe a feminine energy into your life of sorts, a lady, even no matter who you are, but you could be a male or female, and Venus comes over and you have a Venus transit, often she'll bring in a female energy into your life. So that could be going on. I'd like to see in your chart if you've got anything here. 2 degrees Virgo. Okay, now also Mars. Forgot about you over here. Mars at 29 degrees Libra. So I'm talking about this 29th degree. Again, it's the degree of chaos, the degree of danger, really. Again, I've been described as a danger zone. I don't want anybody to freak out and be scared or anything. But ultimately, the energy that we're receiving from Mars and Libra, Mars is debilitated in Libra as well. But Mars, he's the influencer of aggression and frustrations. And Mars is wonderful to make us take action. Mars actually has a very big influence on our reaction to things. Like the moon is more like our internal emotional response, but how we react to things is a very Martian kind of energy. Say you're, easily triggered. I got to react to this. That's very Martian energy. And working at the 29th degree, and he's debilitated. And however, as I do think that Mars finishing up in the sign of Libra, especially because next he's going to move into the sign of Scorpio. He's a real tough guy there. But it's almost like Mars is fighting for justice, okay? The sign of Libra is the sign of justice and balance and harmony, okay? And sharing your energy with another human. So in some ways, Mars is kind of like attacking that energy, but at the same time, I think it's also Mars is trying to push through with justice. And, I think I used the example before of like the Epstein files. There's so many things that I would love to talk about. I would love to talk about the rabbit holes that I have been down in exclusive detail, but I don't think it's wise for me to do that. But I do think that there's a very strong connection between what is going on in the world. The whole world's a stage. I mean, of course, some things have to be real in order to, for people to be perceiving the information as reality. But I do think that this Epstein files, for lack of better terminology here, is playing a very big role in the other things that are going on. And yes, I will just say it. Yes, even this Charlie Kirk situation. I do think there's a connection there, and I'm not really willing to share what that connection is because, again, I don't want to be attacked for things. And again, everybody's entitled to their own opinion. But, maybe on a personal call, if you want to schedule a reading, then I'm more likely to be willing to share that kind of information. But Mars firing people up, he's in that 29th degree. And I think he's like trying to force things to come through. It's going to get more aggressive when he moves into the sign of Scorpio, but there's that. If you have anything near 29 degrees Libra, I highly recommend being very, very mindful and very, very careful, especially there's a square that's going on between Pluto and Mars here. So I'd be very cautious of your surroundings and also how you're, reacting to things out in the world. Mercury also in Libra. I like Mercury in Libra. Mercury is the mental function, data processing, receiving information through our consciousness, and then being able to communicate that information. And Libra, it's the sign of balance. It's the sign of harmony. It's represented by the scales. Again, it's a sign of justice. And really, Mercury does quite well in all the air signs. He's not necessarily he's not exalted here or anything, or is in his own home, but he does work nicely here. And Mercury is not in retrograde. If you got anything near 5 degrees Libra, maybe your mental functions, a little more optimal right now, or maybe you're able to communicate more clearly and concisely, or maybe you're able to see both sides of the picture a little more fairly and be a diplomat sort of thing. Okay, and then let's talk about Jupiter and then Chiron. Okay, so Jupiter at 21 degrees Cancer. Jupiter is moving forward. Let's go through the retrogrades. We've got, for retrogrades, we've got Pluto in retrograde. We've got the nodes in retrograde, but they're almost always in retrograde. We've got Saturn in retrograde. We've got Neptune in retrograde. We've got Chiron in retrograde. We've got Uranus in retrograde. Jupiter is not in retrograde. Hallelujah for that. Jupiter, as I've said before, I think Jupiter going to the sign of Cancer is kind of our saving grace. Because there's so many other really brutal forces coming through. Jupiter exalts in the sign of Cancer. Jupiter is the great benefic. Jupiter influences abundance and luck and wisdom and philosophy, and he gets to be extra, bring abundance, and it's a charitable energy with Jupiter coming to the sign of Cancer. If you've got anything near 21 degrees Cancer, you might be receiving something, whether if it's an abundance of wisdom or something of abundance that's in a material form, or something like all of a sudden you're seeking out to expand your consciousness. That very well could be going on. If you've got anything prominent near 21 degrees Cancer, of course, it depends on what it is that you've got in your natal chart that is near 21 degrees Cancer, but ultimately Jupiter works beautifully in the sign of Cancer. Okay, Chiron here. Chiron in retrograde. Chiron is in retrograde all the way until I think it's January 1st or January 2nd. So the wounded healer moving backwards, I think he's going all the way back to like 22 degrees, maybe 23 degrees Aries. Regardless, look in your chart to see if you've got anything between, I'm going to go down to 23 degrees Chiron, 23 degrees Aries to 26 degrees, 27 degrees Aries. If you do, you've got what the wounded healer who influences, in short, wants us to heal our deep-seated wounds from early childhood and potentially wounds that are coming from a previous lifetime. Chiron might have influenced those wounds as an astrological cosmic force that comes down, but he's also saying, let's heal these things. Let's break that karma so we don't have to keep reliving these things. And there's so many different ways to go about this. A lot of times with a Chiron transit, it's more about acceptance. And sometimes it's like, why was I trying to fix that thing? It's like, it's not necessarily broken. It's just an acceptance, and allowing for more of a natural process of healing. Regardless, if you've got something, again, between say 23 up to 27 degrees Aries, Chiron, the wounded healer, who again wants us to heal these deep-seated wounds, is moving backwards over that thing. And so that it might be time to be reevaluating some sort of a healing journey, or maybe something's coming up to the surface for you that you hadn't realized about. This is why I am the way I am. This is why I'm easily triggered by that, because that thing that happened when I was 4 years old or whatever. And Chiron's saying, hey, I'm trying to bring this to your attention. I think you should reevaluate this, and so that we can heal it and we can move forward a little more comfortably throughout life. Okay, so that, I know that was a lot to process, and I apologize if some of it got confusing. It's just a lot of different weird energies coming through, and again, like, difficult to find the right words to really help people understand the importance and the significance of this time that we are living in, and these eclipses are just so prominent. And by no means am I suggesting something's going to happen on September 21st, on the day of the eclipse, but it's more that full, it's like, again, that pressure valve with an eclipse. Okay. And it's like, when you're cooking with a pressure cooker, you open the thing up. It's like, that's in essence very similar to the kind of energy that we receive through an eclipse, but it's so prominent. Some people absolutely will feel it. Most people, it's subconscious. Most people, Again, I'll leave a link to so you guys can read about this stuff for yourself. There's all different. My favorite books on eclipses is Eclipses on and You by Judith Hill, and also the lunar nodes in your chart. Your Key to Excellent Chart Interpretation is a great book that talks a lot about eclipses. That's very much from an astrological, like including the zodiac kind of energy to understand. Actually, the lunar nodes and Your Key to Excellent Chart Interpretation, that one does bring in, of course, the zodiac, but it also really helps people understand the north and south node. But I will also leave that a link to read about, basically, in short, Rudolf Steiner's perspective on eclipses, because I think he really breaks it down in a way that is very advanced. Okay, so in the body, the sign of Virgo, kind of already talked about this. It rules the intestines and rules the liver and also rules the sympathetic nervous system. Okay, let's start here. For the intestines, actually, let's start here. My favorite, which I've brought up so many times before, my favorite herb for, my favorite supplement for intestines is called RUG, R-U-G, Remove Unwanted Guests. It's just got a combination of all the right herbs to help clean gunk out of the intestines, keep things clean, removal of waste, that sort of thing. That's definitely my favorite supplement. If I don't take Rug for like 3 or 4 months or something, I notice I just don't, my brain doesn't work as well. My body doesn't function as well versus if I don't take it every single day of the week, but I just kind of go through cycles of taking it. And when I do, I notice that I definitely just function more optimally. But this right here is yellow dock. Yellow dock is also a great herb for intestinal support. Although I will say this, if you've had your gallbladder removed, you might, and I'm not a doctor, this is not medical advice. Please understand that I'm not trying to teach anybody medical advice or opinion. This is just information that I have learned from my really wonderful teachers over the years and experience for myself. And so I like to share information about it. I always encourage people, check in with your favorite healthcare practitioner, but also I encourage everyone to do their own research into, if you're going to be putting something in your body, I do encourage people to do their own research. And personally, I don't think one little Google search to, what's this herb for, Google, and I feel like at least take it to another step. My favorite author for understanding herbs is Matthew Wood, the Earthwise Repertory by Matthew Wood. But yellow dock, if you've had your gallbladder removed, might want to be specifically careful with how much. Not only that, yellow dock you can become dependent on it because it does function a little bit as a laxative. And so, in case you haven't heard that, people can become dependent on taking laxatives, like the body won't be able to get rid of waste on its own anymore. And yellow dock, it's a very mild version of that. But if it's also something that can basically kind of influence or get bile to be produced, and if you've had your gallbladder removed, that might complicate things. I've had my gallbladder removed. Unfortunately, I wish I knew the things that I know now. That was 20 years ago that I had my gallbladder removed. And I've certainly learned a lot over those 20 years. But I still indulge in yellow dock every once in a while. And then also for the liver, this right here is milk thistle. I've brought up milk thistle a bunch of times. Milk thistle is also, unfortunately, another one that if you've had your gallbladder removed, which I know a lot of people have, unfortunately, a lot of people have had their gallbladder removed because you know what? They've been saying Western medicine has been saying, oh, we don't need the gallbladder. We needed it long ago when we were eating raw meat and that sort of thing. We don't need it anymore. We can remove the gallbladder. Well, it's just a bummer. I wish that I still had my gallbladder because there's ways to clean out gallstones without removing the whole darn gallbladder. Again, this is not medical advice, but milk thistle is another one that if you have had your gallbladder removed, might want to just be a little bit mindful of it. Again, this is not medical advice or opinion. But milk thistle is not only detoxifying for the liver, but it like helps to revive and rejuvenate damaged liver tissue, like tissue in the liver. And what I do, again, I don't have a gallbladder, but I still have milk thistle every once in a while. I will grind it up. I'll put it in the coffee grinder. Like I'll buy it in the whole seed. You can see that those are whole seeds. I put it in the coffee grinder and grind them up, just like you would with coffee beans. And then I make the tea with that immediately. I went into a little bit more detail in my last Virgo new moon video. It's basically like, wouldn't you rather have fresh cracked pepper than, pepper that's already been, little tiny pieces of pepper? It loses its potency if they're already ground up. So that's why I always like to get them in the full seed. So milk thistle is great for the liver. As far as the sympathetic nervous system, hops can be very, very helpful. I've never had this experience for myself, but I have heard people say that they've felt a little sleepy after taking hops. I like it in a tincture form, but it can be really, really great for relaxing that sympathetic nervous system. And then also lemon balm. I think lemon balm has kind of become my favorite herb for the nervous system kind of period, because it's Jupiterian. It's uplifting. If you've ever smelled lemon balm, it literally smells like a lemon. It kind of smells like pine sol. Maybe you remember the cleaning stuff, pine sol. But it smells way more. It smells like a natural, like a plant of pine sol. It just smells very, very fresh and uplifting. It doesn't smell like a nasty ass, toxic chemical cleaner pine sol, but more like the uplifting, refreshing scent of a lemon mixed in with something that's cleansing. And it's very Jupiterian. I like taking my lemon balm in a tincture form, but also, especially if you can get your hands on fresh lemon balm to make a tea with, absolutely delightful for the sympathetic nervous system. Okay, now, gemstones. A dedicated zodiacal birthstone for the sign of Virgo is sapphire. And as I've said so many times before, I don't understand why. I don't understand why, because there's so many different kinds of sapphires. There's blue, there's yellow, there's pink, okay? And all of these different kinds of sapphire, they have a different kind of energy to them. Blue sapphire is like could be great for things like calming inflammation, because it's like creates things to become tighter and cold and tighter energetically. Versus yellow sapphire is more like woo, like opening things up with abundance. Pink sapphire could be really, really great for emotions. None of these things are really totally connected to the sign of Virgo. But if you're a Virgo rising or whatever, and you want to go get a sapphire to be wearing your birthstone, I would never discourage somebody from doing that. Personally, one day I am going to get an extremely high quality yellow sapphire. But they're not exactly the most affordable stone. But what I have studied is more like traditional, real astrological medicine. There's something that's called an upaye system that is basically traditional medical astrology using gemstone remedies. And since Virgo is ruled by Mercury, Mercury stone is a green emerald, which that makes sense to me. I completely understand why a green emerald belongs to Mercury. Mercury is Virgo's ruler. And not only that, but if you read through like the encyclopedia of, what is it? The Encyclopedia of Crystals by Judy Hall, you'll notice that all these green stones resonate beautifully with the sign of Virgo, which that makes sense to me. The green is said to be really good for the nervous system. It's like not necessarily to stimulate it, and it's also not necessarily to calm it. It's more like to clarify, bring clarity to what's going on in the nervous system. And so green emerald, specifically for Virgo rising, could be great. But a more affordable version of that, a more affordable substitute, we should say, is this right here, is malachite, which malachite's great. It's very, very protective. It's got a lot of copper in it, a beautiful stone. At some point in my life, I would love to get like a much bigger piece of malachite, because It's a clarifying stone. It's protective for all sorts of things, again, because it's got copper in it. So malachite is great. And not only that, but malachite resonates with so many of the zodiac signs. But also, again, the green stones. This right here is called tree agate. There's also moss agate, any kind of green agate or green jasper. This right here, I think it's pronounced Kambabwa jasper, which is a green jasper. Any of the green stones tend to make sense to me why they resonate beautifully with that sign of Virgo, because it can be calming to the nerve, like more, again, like bringing clarity to the nervous system. But lastly here, what I'm going to mention, this right here is snowflake obsidian, which resonates beautifully with the sign of Virgo. And the reason I brought this out is because it's a protective stone. Really, any kind of obsidian is super protective. This is a piece of obsidian right here. But this is a little bit more of like a lighter version of it. It's said to be also be very good for the nervous system and also very, very affordable. The reason I bring this down is because the protection of the eclipse energy is just so forceful. I don't want to be exposing myself to any evil forces. And so that's why I try to keep myself protected from, when we're experiencing an eclipse. And also I like to use gemstones. Certainly not everybody does, but I think I'm going to leave that there. I think I rambled on long enough. If you would like to schedule an astrology reading with me, we can go into further depth on how these eclipses, just the overall energy, are hitting your own natal chart, whatever you want to do. Transits, progressions, an overall just natal chart analysis, medical astrology, whatever you want to look into. You can schedule through my website, which is erinwageastrology.com. I do hope to hear from some of you. And until next time, namaste to all of you.